Hello everybody, this is Jay Davis, the Gaming Gaijin, and this is my 3 game recommendations for Dinky Dana's contest. Hopefully I'm not too late to actually enter the contest, but if I am, then here's 3 game recommendations. First up, a game that I consider one of the best games on both the NES and on the Game Boy Advance. River City Ransom and River City Ransom EX, the remake of River City Ransom. River City Ransom was made by Technos, a company probably best known in the West for its Double Dragon series. And not unrelatedly, this is a beat 'em up. But this is a beat 'em up RPG. The way that works is you don't have experience, you don't level up from beating people up. But you do have stats, and when you beat people up, they drop money. And there are certain areas in the game where there are shops, and you can buy items that will heal your character or increase their stats or even teach them new moves. So it's actually got quite a bit of variety there. Like you can just sort of pick it up and play it like a beat 'em up, or you can actually put some time in and build up your character and all that sort of stuff like you would get from an RPG. The writing in the game is fairly humorous, and the graphics have this really nice kind of cartoony style to them, so more than anything, this game is great for co-op. Just sit down with a buddy, go around beating people up, taking their money, and buying stuff to make yourself better. I mean, all beat 'em ups are pretty good for co-op, but this one it's really its strong suit. And that's where I've got to start talking about the differences in the remake, because unfortunately, the one thing bad I have to say about the remake on the Game Boy Advance is they took out the co-op. Now when they originally announced this remake, it was going to have 4-player co-op, but then it got delayed, and then it got delayed, and eventually they just released it without the co-op. The remake does have a lot going for it in the single-player area, though. There are a lot more weapons, a lot more moves your guy can learn, a lot of those. There are new optional bosses. The bosses that are in the game have more variety to them, since each one now sort of specializes in one of the new special moves, where in the original they just kind of got stronger as you progressed. And you can summon the bosses. When you beat them up, you can actually befriend them, because while this doesn't have human co-op, they did add the ability to have computer allies on your team. You can have up to 3 computers helping you. And similarly, the amount of enemy characters on the screen is doubled on this. On this one you only pretty much had 2 people at a time on the screen that you were fighting against, and on here you've got 4. So the remake gives a much better single-player experience, but the original is where you have to go for co-op. The Game Boy Advance game might not be too hard to find. I don't know if it's sold that well. The NES game's going to be a little harder, but if nothing else, it's on the Virtual Console, and you can buy it for $5. My next recommendation is on the Nintendo DS, and it is this: Retro Game Challenge. And since I'm mentioning it, I might as well talk about its sequel, which was unfortunately only released in Japan. Game Center CX Arino's Challenge 2. Basically, these are a collection of retro games that you are given a series of challenges to complete within. Now, the reason I put quotes around retro is because none of the games in these were actually released on any systems back in the day. They were all created for these, but they are styled as games for the Famicom or the Super Famicom or the Game Boy or even the MSX. They kind of go all over the place. And while you are given the specific short challenges to complete in the games, you can also just sit down and play the games, and they are full games. It would have been fully worthy of commercial release individually back in the day. And they do actually feel like old games. It's not like... They don't feel like they're just new games with a 8-bit coat of paint on them. They feel like good old Nintendo games. There is some variety to the games in here. They're not all one genre. You've got everything from platformers and puzzle games. You've got adventure games, action games, RPGs, top-down car racing game, all sorts of stuff. The first game's probably going to be easy to find for relatively cheap, but it didn't sell that well, which is why the other one didn't get brought over, which is really unfortunate, because they are excellent games. I recommend these to pretty much anybody, not just people who like old games. Unless you're like a 12-year-old who only likes shiny new HD graphics and deserves to be slapped, probably, then I recommend these. The second game, obviously, if you go for it, you're going to have to pay a bit more because you're going to have to import it. And it can be played without guides for the most part. The challenges, if you just play the games normally, you'll probably beat the challenges without even knowing what the challenges are, until you get about halfway in, and you'll run into two of the games that are an RPG and a menu-based adventure game, and both of those you're going to need guides to get through. But there are guides online that will at least help you get past the challenges for those and unlock the rest of the game. I don't know if there are any guides yet to actually beat those two games, but you don't have to beat them to get the rest of the games, you just have to beat the challenges for them. And my final recommendation is going to be this. Not Pac-Man World 2, Pac-Man Versus. Pac-Man Versus is a game for the GameCube, actually designed by Shigeru Miyamoto, that has fallen into obscurity for a handful of reasons. One of those reasons is because it was only originally released as a pack-in, pun intended, with a handful of Namco-developed GameCube games. One of those was Pac-Man World 2, another was iNinja, and another was R-Racing. Not necessarily the best selection of Namco games. The reason I got it with Pac-Man World 2 is because it was a player's choice title and thus only $20 for both of the games. I do not think I've ever actually put Pac-Man World 2 in my GameCube or Wii. It was later released to certain stores as a promotional giveaway in just a cardboard envelope, not an actual case. Another reason I don't think that many people know about it or have played it is because it requires one of these things, the Nintendo GameCube Game Boy Advance connectivity cable thingamabobber, which a lot of people didn't bother to buy because not that many games actually required it. In fact, I don't know, besides Pac-Man Versus and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, I'm not sure of any games that actually required it. Like, even Four Swords Adventures, if you were only playing by yourself, you could get away with the GameCube controller. Although that game did come with the cable, so... But basically, this game is multiplayer Pac-Man. One person with the Game Boy Advance plays as Pac-Man, can see the entire maze, and does what Pac-Man does. Eats pellets, eats fruit, eats ghost if he can, gets points for doing it. The other players, looking at the TV, where they have a limited view around each ghost, so they can't see the whole maze, they can't see where Pac-Man is unless he gets close to them. And their goal is just kill Pac-Man. When someone does manage to kill Pac-Man, they take some of Pac-Man's points, and then the players switch controllers, and that person's Pac-Man now. At the beginning of the game, you choose how many points you want to play to, and once somebody reaches that number of points, the game's over and they win. What I only recently found out is that the Namco Museum for the Nintendo DS also includes a version of Pac-Man Versus, which supports the DS download play, so even though every person you're playing with has to have a Nintendo DS, they don't all have to have Namco Museum. So if you know a bunch of people with Nintendo DS's in your area, that might be the more convenient way to go. Anyway, those are my 3 or potentially 6, depending on how you want to count it, recommendations, and hopefully I'll get a proper introduction video up on this channel soon. Until then, keep playing.